really happy to have you for this webinar, and we're super grateful to Park Slope parents for co-hosting with us, and of course, the force of nature, Weiss, as always. So just a reminder that this is an anonymous audience, so definitely keep your video and audio off. We are going to be recording it, so that's to help protect your privacy. As Carla said, we are Small Brooklyn Psychology. We are a group of neuropsychologists and psychologists. You'll see us all down there at the bottom on the presentation there. 3 of us are neuropsychologists, 3 of us are therapists, and we work with people of all ages, but especially kids and families and parents. And you know, one of the biggest questions that we have been getting really since COVID started is how to manage all of the meltdowns and the big emotions that come with all of the extra anxiety that we're all dealing with right now. It's always been a big question, period, but now during these times, we are getting how to preserving and then even further building your relationships. Jill is our resident expert on this, and she's going to be leading the webinar. Like Carla said, if you have any questions along the way, please chat them to me. And then at the end of Jill's presentation, we're going to have about half of the time over for questions and answers. So if you put them in the chat box, I will help moderate that later on. All right, so to introduce Jill DePietro is a licensed clinical social worker. She specializes in evaluating and treating kids and adolescents with ADHD, disruptive and oppositional behaviors, selective mutism, autism spectrum disorder, anxiety, and all kinds of other behavioral and emotional disorders. She has lots of experience in conducting treatment using gold standard evidence interventions to children and their families, including parent-child interaction therapy, which is PCIT, you may have heard of it, for autism and for working with toddlers. She is trained in using parent management training, PMT, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, as well as social skills training. And she's really passionate about her work, and she's super good at it. So Jill's going to take it away, and I'll be back later for the Q&A. So don't forget to type your questions in the chat box, because only I will see them. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm so excited to get started tonight. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me. Like Mandy said, I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I specialize in the diagnosis and treatment of children and adolescents with disruptive behaviors, ADHD, and anxiety. So we are going to, why is this going? Okay, there you go, I have to click it. So we're gonna jump right in. So the hope is that after this training and presentation, you will be able to understand the impact of the world on our kids. What we know is that we're all experiencing a ton of trauma and stress right now. And that's the reality. And so we have to think about, how is this affecting us? And how is this likely affecting our children? I'm going to talk you through exactly what's normal right now, what is very common to experience with your kids right now. Additionally, I'm going to walk us through some strategies to reinforce positive behaviors. Importantly, we're going to go through behavior charts in a very simple way, and also think about ways in which we can reinforce and manage and promote our own self-care. Because of course, that's the most important, right? We can't put our mask on before putting, or we can't put anybody else's mask on before putting our mask on ourselves, right? So we have to take care of ourselves first in order to be the best we can be for our kids. My disclaimer here is that I wish I could do therapy in 1 hour, and I can't, because I'm not a magician. And so we have to recognize that this is a 1 hour presentation. I'm going to try to share as much as I possibly can within this 1 hour. And if you need more support, that's what we're here for. We do treatment in as little as 6 sessions. It's not long term, but we're here to support you in any way that we can. And I'll share our contact information in a little bit. All right, so as we're thinking about understanding and navigating these new challenges, keep in mind that our kids are experiencing stress in the exact same way that we are. okay? So think about all of the tension and the stress that you've experienced in the last, 5 months now, right? Our kids are experiencing that as well. So I think throughout these last 5 months, we've had conflicting emotions, right? On one hand, it's amazing to be home with the kids. On the other hand, it's a nightmare to now be their parent and their teacher, right? So it's so incredibly common to have these conflicting emotions and be experiencing these things at the exact same time. And our kids are experiencing them too. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that you're here right now, that you're taking the time out, you're taking 1 hour out of your day to be attentive, to think about just how to best serve your child right now or your children right now, how best to support them during this emotional and stressful time. And be kind to yourself because, again, our kids are experiencing the same anxiety and the same stress that we are. So we want to acknowledge that too. At this time, knowing everything that's happened, all of the same challenges that we saw in March, we're going to still see, right? In our children, it's extremely common to still see anxiety, attention-seeking behaviors, right? Maybe an increase in negotiation or kind of that back and forth. Sleep disturbances are incredibly common right now. Separation anxiety is incredibly common right now, an increase in tantrums and disruptive behavior. We're seeing this across the board in kids that we've never seen it before. So keep in mind that these behaviors are incredibly common, especially right now. We want to think about the fact that in the beginning, it was very acute in nature, right? It was kind of like survival mode. We were jumping right in. We were doing whatever we had to keep kids and our families safe. And now, this is likely, I hate to say this term because I know everybody hates it, but this is likely our new normal for a little while. So now we have to get back into our baseline and recognize, how do we make this work? Because we need to make this work so that everybody feels supported and everybody is met with empathy right now. It's easier said than done, but we're going to try to touch on a little bit of that tonight. So first and foremost, our kids are like sponges. Whatever stress we're feeling, they're feeling too, right? While this can be scary, because of course everybody is feeling and experiencing different levels of stress and trauma, this is also a great teaching opportunity. This is a great opportunity to show our kids how we can work through stress. Kids are unbelievably resilient. Our kids are going to come out so much stronger because of this. They're going to be way stronger than us. But it's an incredible moment to show them exactly how we work through stress and anxiety, right? And we do that in such a natural and automatic way as adults, right? We just kind of take that anxiety, maybe we work through it in maybe not the most appropriate ways, but for the most part, right, we try to meet that stress with coping strategies and adaptive coping strategies, right? Like deep breathing, coping thoughts, recognizing that that maybe your thinking is going to a negative pattern, right? This is not the end. We're all okay. We're all safe, right? So this is a great time to actually show your kids and model that behavior for them. Talk out loud about when you're having these experiences. We're going to touch a little bit more on that in a few moments, though. So first and foremost, we want to validate our children's feelings as much as possible. I like to think about this as opening up the conversation, right? So much has changed. Let's talk about how you're feeling and keeping that conversation open. Kids like to know what's happening. We want to use developmentally appropriate language as much as we can to keep them in the loop, right? Answer those questions that they have. If they ask, am I going back to school? And you don't know the answer to that, that's okay. Tell them we don't know yet. I don't know, and I promise you that the minute I do know, I will share that information with you. and get their thoughts, get their feelings, right? Understand exactly where they're coming from too. Answer whatever questions they have. Any conversation that's difficult in nature, and certainly a lot of conversations have been pretty difficult these days. Any conversation that we have with our kids is not one that we're going to only have one time, right? We're going to have that multiple times. So they might be asking, what's happening outside of my window? Why are there so many protests going on? It's scary. Talk to them in whatever way you can. And as you guys, I know Mandy already mentioned this, but as you guys are having questions or things are coming up, feel free to just write that down in the chat so we can answer them in a little bit at the end. It's important also to observe how the trauma and the stress that we're all under is affecting our children, right? And not only their behaviors, but also how are they processing this information? Oftentimes young children, they process a lot through play. Right? There's a reason that we have play therapists in the world. So see their patterns in play. Observe their play with their friends or with their siblings, right? Observe, does somebody have coronavirus in their play? Is that a theme that's coming up? And maybe slip in there, right? And ask, do you have any questions about this? Right? Is there something I can do to help you understand this better? One thing I love doing for little kids, so I work a lot with little kids like 2 to 7 years old. And one thing for that age group, plus maybe up to like 8 or 9, is to create a social story. Social story is a visual picture book that you create that has pictures of your children, and you're able to walk them through what's happening, right? We're going to go to the hospital to get a coronavirus test, or maybe we're going to the doctor's office, right? First, we're going to sit in the waiting room. We're going to wait for our name to be called, right, etc. So we're going to move on to behavior. And again, any questions you have, feel free to just pop them in the chat and we will address them when we can at the end. So we're going to talk a little bit about behavior. So what I have outlined here is our coercive cycle. Anytime we're thinking about disruptive behavior, we're thinking about this coercive cycle. So I'm going to run through this for a minute. Probably will sound pretty familiar to a lot of people. So first, child engages in problem behavior after being asked to do something, right? For instance, turn off your video game, it's time for dinner. Just a classic, right? This happens all the time. A parent has a response, right? Maybe the child is refusing, and so the parent escalates with yelling. And then the child escalates too. The child kind of meets that parent right where they are. Maybe the child starts screaming or they throw the controller. The parent escalates. And what happens? Sometimes it's a back and forth and it's a negotiation that can last forever. Other times the parent could simply give up. They could just walk away, and they're holding on to that emotional interaction, right? That's painful for them. That's frustrating for them. But what is ultimately happening is that the parent-child interaction is being fractured every single time that happens. And we want to work on making that parent-child interaction as strong as we possibly can. And in this situation and in this coercive cycle, what's happening is that the escalation is being reinforced at every level, right? So the child's escalation as well as the parent's escalation, both of these things are being reinforced in the moment. So as we're thinking about breaking the coercive cycle, we want to change our pattern of interaction, right? So the minute we see disruptive or defiant behavior or pushing back in any way, we want to respond in a more appropriate way. That will help both the child and the adult in the situation de-escalate, and the relationship will remain strong, okay? And of course, we're going to talk about exactly how to do this, but we want to reinforce in this moment the positive behaviors and also reinforce problem-solving skills. So again, the whole presentation tonight is going to be about how do we accomplish that. And like I said before, I'm going to try to cover as much as I possibly can. So as we're thinking about reversing the cycle, the first step is to pull yourself out of the coercive cycle and to build a better relationship with your child. It seems simple. It seems very self-explanatory. Think about this as the foundation or the building blocks to anything that you do as a parent. Obviously, you care incredibly deeply for your children. You wouldn't be here if you didn't, right? You wouldn't be here at, 8:30 tonight? You would be in bed, right? So obviously you care very deeply. And what we know about kids is that the stronger that parental bond is, or the stronger that bond is with any adults, the more likely they are to listen to you, okay? So the goal is to help you enjoy being with your child again, to enjoy the moments again, to not let it become a negotiation that is constantly bringing both of you down. I like to think about this as putting money in the bank, right? We know kids listen more to adults that they know care about them. That's the first step I tell any parent. I don't care if your child is 18 years old or 25 years old. Number one is building up that relationship. I tell that to teachers too. It's across the board, therapists, everybody. So as we're thinking about putting money in the bank, we want to have a lot of money in that bank so that when we start to put in consequences, when we start to ask more of them, when we start to give them a chore list, we have enough money in that bank to pull out from. For children ages 2 to 7 years old, 5 minutes a day of one-on-one time is all you need. 5 minutes a day of one-on-one time is enough time, research says, enough time to build up that relationship to make it as strong as possible. For kids a little bit older, we're likely looking at about 10 minutes a day. We want to, in these moments, let the child lead. We decide a lot for our kids, right? We decide where they're going to school, what they're putting on their bodies, what they're putting in their bodies to some degree, right? Who their friends are to some degree. This playtime, essentially, you don't need to be in control. This one-on-one time, we want to focus on phrasing positive behaviors as much as possible. And we're going to talk more about these skills, don't worry. Describing their behaviors, describing their physical behaviors, imitating their play, and active listening skills. So reflecting back their language. So we think a lot about setting up positive antecedents. As we set up positive antecedents, we're more likely to see positive behaviors. Positive antecedents refer to how do we set our kids up for success? How do we create opportunities for our child to succeed? This can be something like creating a social story, which we just talked about. This can be setting up behavioral expectations. So something as simple as dinner time, right? Happens every night. Every night going to your kid and saying, okay, these are the expectations for dinner time. You're gonna sit nicely in your seat. We're going to use our utensils. We're going to keep our bottoms in the chair, right? And you're reviewing these things. Does that mean that your child is going to do those things? Absolutely not. That is why this is step one. However, it does mean that you know that you provided the expectations up front. They know exactly what's coming, right? They know exactly how they should behave. And then you can also tick that box that, okay, I told them, right? I gave them that information. So if they're not behaving or if they are getting up out of their seat, I know I did my due diligence. I provided those expectations. We love to provide transition warnings whenever possible. Transitions can be incredibly difficult for kids, especially if we're transitioning to a less preferred activity. So transition warnings, I'm gonna have to hurry, or transition warnings can be something like, all right, buddy, we're about to have dinner. It's gonna be time for cleanup in 5 minutes. We wanna provide that information in a physically close way. Visual routines and schedules are paramount. And I actually think most parents learned this during the craziness of COVID while they were teachers, right? Having it listed out exactly what's coming for their kids helps kids follow the routine and also creates more control over the situation. All right, so we talked a little bit about this, right? Modeling positive behaviors as much as possible, right? Talking through difficult moments with your child. We want to talk through those when we're experiencing them for ourselves, not necessarily for our kids. What we know is that if we're talking about our children's behaviors, right, we're more likely to reinforce that behavior. So while parents can often feel very compelled to address a tantrum right in the moment, what we know is that's actually providing a lot of attention to the tantrum. So instead, we want to, what we like to say is like strike when the iron's cold, right? We want to actually let them cool down and then maybe talk about it after the fact. For stressful moments for adults, it's really good to model and talk out loud about your own coping skills. Something as simple as, you know what, I was feeling really stressed when I was going to work today. I had to go on the subway. I know that we're doing all that much anymore, but I had to go on the subway and it was late. And I was really nervous because I was going to be late for my meeting. But I took a few deep breaths. And I remember that it's okay because I'm never usually late, right? Just even something as simple as that. You're talking out loud, you're modeling positive and adaptive coping skills for your kids. Just by that modeling, we're more likely to see a child do that. And I've seen that in kids as young as 5 years old, that they start mimicking what they're seeing their parents do as coping skills. All right, so as I mentioned, attention is an incredibly powerful, potent behavior tool. So what we know is that attention will reinforce behavior. Think about this like watering the flowers, right? If we're watering our flowers, they're more likely to grow, they're going to flourish. If we're watering our weeds, guess what? They're more likely to grow, they're more likely to flourish. The same thing goes for behavior. So the more we pay attention to negative behavior, this can be whining, tantruming, arguing, negotiating, the more likely it is to increase. And the less likely positive behavior is to increase if we ignore it. So we want to flip that scale. Instead, we want to pay a ton of attention to positive, pro-social behaviors. The more attention that we pay to these behaviors, the more likely we are to see them increase. So we really want to be on the lookout for these types of behaviors, right? Sharing, caring, listening, cooperating, all of those beautiful, amazing behaviors that we typically expect from our kids, but maybe they're having a harder time with right now. We want to attend to those fully. And I'm going to tell you exactly how to attend to them in a minute. First, we're going to talk about how to define a behavior. As adults, we tend to define behavior in extremely broad terms, right? We tend to say things like, be a good boy, or behave. My version of behaving is likely going to be very different than your version of behaving. So we want to think about behaviors that are observable, that are measurable, and that are specific. We want to think about behaviors that would pass a stranger test. What that means, if I said to a stranger, I'm watching every time my child behaves, would they be able to count the amount of times that that child was behaving and have it match mine? Probably not, because again, our definitions might be very different. So we want to instead think about very specific behaviors to reinforce. Hitting. Hitting's a good one, right? Hitting, we can observe, we can measure it. It's very specific. Hitting, I can count the number of times my child is hitting. That stranger over there can probably count the same amount of times. What we know about behaviors is that they're thriving for specific reasons, okay? So behaviors tend to thrive for 4 different reasons, and we call these the functions of behavior. The functions of behavior will determine how we target a behavior. So it's really important to be able to kind of flesh this out. And this is what I do with families all day long. So it's okay if you're thinking about your child and you're having a hard time determining, is it attention or is it tangible? I'm going to walk you through what that means. So sensory. Sensory refers to it feels good. It's enjoyable. It's not necessarily a behavior that's being reinforced by anyone's attention. A great example of this, and just a reminder, we're going to send you these slides, don't worry about taking notes. A good example of this is jumping on the couch. When you're jumping on the couch, it feels good. Mom could leave the room, doesn't really matter, it still feels really fun, it feels good. That's a behavior that is reinforced by a sensory function. The E, so this is a SEAT acronym, S-E-A-T. The E stands for escape or avoidance. A classic one of this I like to use as an example is every time a child gets a math test. My stomach hurts, I have to go to the nurse, right? So they're trying to get out of that math test. This is one that we see all the time with our kiddos that are anxious. So this is an extremely common one. Or every time you put down broccoli and peas on your child's plate, he says, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, right? And you know they're just trying to get out of eating their vegetables. So that's to get out of something. The E in our SEAT acronym refers to the A rather, refers to attention. Attention is an incredibly powerful tool, as I've already noted, to reinforce both positive and negative behavior. So attention is gaining an interaction from someone. Okay, so this example is if your child is tantruming at home because it's bedtime, if you give them a lot of attention in that moment, you're feeding into that behavior. Again, you're helping that behavior grow. Okay, and it's really hard, especially around bedtime. I saw that in some people's notes that they wanted help around bedtime, which is really tough, and it's really tough to cover in an hour, so I'll do my best. But bedtime rather is tough because kids are likely getting a lot of attention during bedtime, which they want because it's hard to go to bed. So attention can be used to reinforce both positive and negative behaviors, right? If we give attention in a positive and specific praise, hey buddy, I love that you slept in your bed last night, that will increase the likelihood of that behavior. Tangible is to get something. Classic example of this one I like to use is the minute we go in the grocery store, your child is screaming and you say, shh, you're too loud, right? There's only 50 people in this grocery store now. And you give them the iPad and they shush. This is a classic one, right? I know, especially in these certain environments, that I can scream my head off and I'm gonna get something for it. Okay, I'm getting a physical object. So when we're thinking about reinforcing positive behavior, we have a PRIDE acronym. This PRIDE acronym is used in PCIT, one of the therapies that I'm trained to do. This is a therapy we do with kids 2 to 7 years old. We do it also for toddlers, also for older kids. So a little bit also outside of that age range. This is a therapy rather, where I am live coaching parents through a walkie-talkie system or in telehealth through their AirPods, and I'm coaching them on exactly what to say to their children. So exactly what to verbalize to their kids to reinforce positive behaviors and how to ignore minor misbehaviors. So praises. Praises refer to specific labeled praises to increase behaviors we want to see. This really helps to create a warm environment. This helps to build up positive behaviors as much as possible. So praise can be something like, thanks so much for listening, or great job coming to the dinner table the first time I asked. I love that you're sharing with your brother. Praises feel really good. They help to increase behavior. This works for kids. This works for adults. The one time your husband or wife washes the dishes, give them a praise. I bet you it's more likely to happen in the future. Reflections refer to reflecting appropriate verbalizations to show our kids that we're actively listening. So this would be reflecting appropriate language. This is a great skill that speech therapists use to increase kids' vocabulary, their grammar skills, etc. Reflection would be if a child said, I want to play with that over there. Well, you want to play with that over there, right? You're just reflecting the language. If your kiddo's a little older, you might reflect just 2 or 3 words. Oh, that over there. Imitation refers to just being present with your child, imitating their behaviors. Descriptions refer to describing their behaviors. So not necessarily the positive behaviors, just their physical behaviors. Oh, you're putting the Lego on top. You're creating a Lego tower. This is so cool, right? You're describing the behaviors. This is an incredible tool for kiddos with ADHD and attentional issues. This will help children focus and attend. There's been tons of studies done to show the effects of behavior descriptions on kids while coloring. And they're so much more likely to stay in the lines while coloring or doing any kind of work. This helps with academics as well. This is a big one that we also teach teachers. Enjoyment simply refers to enjoying the one-on-one time. So these are the skills that you want to focus on during that 5 minutes or the 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your kiddo's age, the 5 to 10 minutes that you are spending with your child. Okay, making praise effective. So we want to make sure it's specific in nature as much as possible. We want to drop all of the negatives, the no, stop, don'ts. What we know is kids have a recency effect, meaning they're going to hear the last thing that we say. If we say, stop running, guess what? All they just heard is running. All that's being reinforced is running. We instead want to make sure we're giving them the positive behaviors, right? Oh, I love that you're using your walking feet. Great job keeping your hands by your side. We want to make sure the last thing that they hear is the behavior that we want to reinforce, okay? We want to be physically close when we can. We want to use praise at a high frequency. So I say between 3 to 5 to 1, right? 3 praises for every constructive feedback you might give your child. So thank you so much for listening to my directions the first time. You can use nonverbal reinforcers, right? A pat on the back, a hug, anything like that goes a very long way. Again, think about that as dropping 1 coin in the money bank. So the next time you say, oh, no, you got to go to bed early tonight, you have enough money to pull out. All right, just keeping an eye on the time. Okay, so we're moving to active ignoring. So active ignoring refers to withdrawing your attention from minor misbehaviors that are reinforced by attention. So this is tantrums, whining, arguing, interruptions, negotiating. What this is never ignoring your child. It is ignoring the negative behavior, waiting for that behavior to subside, and then giving a lot of praise for the positive opposite. So an example of this, your child's whining, you're ignoring that whining, you're waiting. Ignoring means turning your face. That might mean shutting off your eyes, right? Not looking at them, turning away. It might mean looking at a new toy and getting really involved in that toy. The minute you see that child engage in appropriate behavior, thanks so much for coming over and playing with me. Thanks, so I love that you're sitting so calmly with me right now. Right, you're focusing right back on that behavior. That will reinforce behavior. If you're just ignoring, it won't do anything, okay? The active part is actually reinforcing it at the end. Remember that behavior gets worse before it gets better, okay? So this is called an extinction burst. Be prepared to ride this wave. If we give in at the very tippy top of that wave, guess what? It's gonna be so much harder when you're ignoring in the future. All right, so effective directions will increase the likelihood of compliance. So this will help kids, and we're gonna be here, I just wanna note that we're gonna try to be here until like 9:15, 9:10, just to save a little extra room for questions since we're already running out of time. But I'm so excited for your questions to come. So effective directions will help increase the likelihood of compliance. These should be direct, positive, one at a time, right? The good example that I used before, instead of stop running, please use your walking feet, right? It's very simple, you'll be able to observe it. We want to break down tasks whenever possible, right? Using information first and foremost. Information might help get kids to comply before you even have to go to a command or direction. So, all right, buddy, it's time to clean up. Whoa, you cleaned up before I even had to tell you. Awesome, I love how quickly you're listening, right? Or you go to that direction, please put the stack of blocks in this bin, right? You're using, you can't see me, but you're using your nonverbals too, as much as possible. So the effective directions help to reduce a child saying no, right? We want to use, please do this or do this, instead of, Can you do this? Could you do this? Would you do this? Any of those options give the opportunity for your child to say no. Now, they might still say no with an effective direction. However, this reduces the likelihood. And then at the very end, we want to follow up with a big specific label praise. Awesome job listening so quickly. All right, so we're going to run through behavior plans. I want to make a note that behavior plans they feel super simple. They are incredibly complex. So these behavior plans typically can fail for the simplest of reasons. Behavior plans should be done with a consultant. You're more than welcome to reach out to myself or another therapist at Small Brooklyn Psychology, and we can help you with that as well. This is mostly what I do all day long. So focusing on 1 to 3 positively framed behaviors. So listening's a good broad one, but still very specific in nature. Following my daily routine's a good, pretty specific one. Playing kindly with my sister. In a nice tally system, I'll show you an example in a minute. We want to personalize the chart however possible, right? Have stickers, objects, colors, things that the child really enjoys. And we want to have a corresponding list of 5 to 8 rewards that our kids want. We like to have a mixture of both tangible and social reinforcers, right? Maybe you have 2 LOL dolls with picking what they eat for dinner, or going to bed 5 minutes, or 5 minutes wouldn't matter, 15 minutes later, right? So having a mixture of those things, going on a special date with mom. So anything you can think of. We want to cash in about 2 times a week. More frequent cash-ins for younger kids. For younger kids, we might do a daily reward. We want to reinforce as much as we can. We want to provide, I would say, the 2 E's, empathy and encouragement. And the goal is that children will follow this behavior plan and will be consistent with it about 75% of the time. You'll see the behavior you want. Nobody's perfect. So an example of a child that was working to stay in bed, right? 1 small reward at the end of each day. 1 big reward if he did 3 times in a row. This is one that I use for older kids, typically about 7 plus. So this is a very specific one. This little girl loved tie-dye. She also loved TikTok, so I ducked this one out in TikTok, but I took away some of those pictures. So, okay, so I'm gonna go through this for a second. So this would be a simple tally system, right? And then at the very bottom, we're tallying up how many points we have, and then we're cashing them in for prizes on Thursday and Sunday, right? So twice a week for this kiddo. So these are really specific behaviors that were really important to this kiddo and to her parents. This child was highly reinforced by this type of system because she had really potent rewards. The rewards are incredibly important. We also want to keep in mind that we're working on behaviors that are challenging for our children right now, right? We're not working on behaviors that we're gonna, that don't matter, right? Yes, kids shouldn't be reinforced constantly for doing their homework. And if we know homework's really hard, let's put a lot of reinforcement on that specific behavior, right? Let's put our eggs kind of all in that basket, because the goal is once they're doing their homework pretty easily, about 75% of the time, we're gonna swap it for a new behavior. Maybe that behavior is making their bed, right? It's a really simple one. That's the goal. I like to remind parents that kids aren't going to go to college with behavior charts. It's for a short period of time to reinforce very, very specific behaviors. All right, I'm going to give myself 2 more minutes and then leave the rest open for questions. So we want to prioritize compassionate self-care however we possibly can. Again, everything that's happening right now is incredibly hard. People are experiencing the same trauma and very different trauma very consistently throughout the last 5 months. This is unlike anything we've ever experienced before. So reconnecting with activities that felt normal for you back in March or February, right? Maybe that's yoga, maybe that's exercising, maybe that's running. Finding ways to just fill yourself up a little bit, right? We can't pour from an empty cup. So we need to fill ourselves up as much as possible. Setting boundaries for yourself, lowering expectations. I think I had dozens of families I worked with at the start of all of this, and our whole first session was lower the expectations. They're not going to be able to do what they did in school at home right now. We're all going through too much. We're not full. We're not able to give enough. Or give our fullest potential. So let's lower the expectations a little bit for now. Prioritize kindness to yourself. You're all doing the very, very best you can. And it's okay if it's not perfect. I actually think it's a lot better if it's not perfect. It shows our kids that we're human and that this is really hard for us too. And there's a lot of benefit that can be had at that. And most importantly, seek help whenever needed. It takes a village to raise children. So seek help however you need to and however works best for you. If that's a guardian or a parent or a friend, or that's reaching out to us at Small Brooklyn. For the next 2 weeks, try to focus mostly on identifying positive behaviors to reinforce verbally. Attend to them with labeled praise. Begin to actively ignore these minor misbehaviors. Again, this is a tricky skill. So again, even if you just need to help kind of tweaking the system, don't hesitate to reach out. After about 2 weeks, you should, with consistent practice, should start to see these behaviors start to decrease. You should be able to identify 1 to 3 behaviors that you want to reinforce, right? And I like to also remind parents that it's helpful to kind of think about a behavior chart as a child's kind of salary, right? Most of us want to go to work for free, right? And so kids are doing behaviors to earn something right now. Again, we're hoping that that extrinsic reinforcement, that extrinsic motivation will build up their internal system so that it feels really good. They recognize, oh my gosh, I feel so accomplished when I do my work, or when I finish my homework, or when I listen and I get mom's praise and reinforcement. That feels really good. So we're using the behavior chart as a short-term solution. If you find that you're still needing support around more escalated behaviors, hitting, kicking, not screaming, but disruption of property or destruction of property, reach out to us. That's where we need to go through a little bit more specific behavior plan and more specific consequences to be able to support you in the most appropriate way we know how. Again, it's not long-term. It is very short-term. We provide evidence-based therapy, behavior management strategies, behavioral parent training such as PMT or PCAT, cognitive behavioral strategies for kids 7+, for kiddos working through some internalizing behaviors, right, anxiety or depression. We are here to help as much as we possibly can. And we are accepting new families every day. We're here, we want to help you. I know I can speak for everyone at Small Brooklyn Psychology that we are so grateful to be able to support families right now. It just is so humbling and amazing to be able to support families during this incredibly difficult time. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. If you have follow-up questions from this, I'm happy to answer. My email is at the front of this presentation, jill@smallbrooklyn.com. You can also reach out to our team at hello@smallbrooklyn.com. The next slide just refers to a couple of resources that will be available for you when you get this presentation. They're incredible books, evidence-based books that walk you through some of these behavioral skills as well. So I feel like I just rushed through the last part of that, but Mandy, if you want to jump back on and tell me what kind of amazing questions we have that we can hopefully answer in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so we're gonna make it, I think, so that you can see me as well, but maybe not. So Jill, one of the things that you said was that behavior plans are complex and often need to be monitored alongside a therapist. You know, this
Mandy, you're
definitely one of the questions that we get a lot. Oh, geez. One of the questions I get is behavior charts have not worked for my kid. And and so they don't work. So
you're cutting out a little bit, Mandy. I'm going to jump in because I can assume I know where that question's going because I get that question a lot. I think half of my job might be kind of coaching parents to give them another try. So behavior charts can often be really tricky. And I know I said that before. So behavior charts, we often see a lot of reinforcer fatigue, meaning that kids are just simply not reinforced by the rewards that they used to have. I would say the number one thing is that we are not providing enough opportunities to cash in on rewards. So that tends to be what families are missing with their behavior chart, right? Maybe we'll have a 5-year-old that's working on listening skills and they have to listen for the whole week. That is expecting your 5-year-old to be on top of things 100% of the time. And I'm sorry, but that will never happen. That will not happen after you see me. That will not happen ever. So usually it's about breaking down to provide a high level of reinforcement. Again, for a 5-year-old, it's going to be once a day, to be quite frank. It might be a M&M once a day. It might be very tiny, but it will be very frequent. The other thing that I typically see families that come in with behavior charts saying this isn't working is that it's not a very specific behavior, right? So maybe they're working on something very broad like being good. And the opportunities to reinforce that, parents tend to miss, right? Because it's our nature as humans to want to fix things that are going wrong. And so whenever we see something going wrong, we're more likely to attend to it. So we want to, again, shift our focus to actually attend to the positive behaviors that we're seeing. Did that answer the question you were going to ask?
Totally. Thank you for interpreting that through my terrible internet, which is wonderfully timed. So another question that we got has to do with differences between young kids and tweens and teens. A fair number of the parents here are talking about, thinking about their tweens and teens. Are there any sorts of modifications that parents should be thinking about in terms of helping to manage those behaviors?
Great question. I think that certainly the tally system that I showed before, the tie-dyed one, that's a beautiful one to use with tweens and teens. What I would say with teens is that we want to get their input as much as possible. Kids should always, I don't care what their ages are, they should always be involved in the reward system. If it's not reinforcing for the kiddo, it's not going to work. It's very simple. But it's always a good idea to collaborate with the teen as much as possible. Sometimes if we have older teenagers, right, like 14 plus, we tend to use more of a kind of like simpler system, like a contract in place, saying something like the goal, and it's usually around chores, right? So the goal is to clean up my room every day. If I don't clean up my room every day, right, for that day, I'm going to lose my ride to school the next morning, right? So it's a very simple, which usually is a pretty potent reinforcer, right? Like kids want to be driven to school if they have the opportunity to, or at least in the suburbs. So that's a really good one that we tend to use for teenagers. But getting their input, working through problems for teens is also really important. So going through kind of a problem-solving system. For older kids, 7 plus, we tend to, with disruptive behavior or behaviors like this, we tend to actually work just with the parents. So we actually like to help the parents to reinforce and manage this behavior. And we rarely need to bring the child or the teenager in for therapy. And I think that's an important note because sometimes parents also don't want to seek out support for older children, or again, like 7, 8, 9 plus, because they're worried that their child won't engage in therapy. And it's actually not necessarily that they're going to even be brought in. It might just be the parent work that we're doing right now.
Good point. Another question has to do with aggression and how to handle it in the moment. So active ignoring is, very powerful, but what do you do when a kid is actively hitting you or actively hitting a younger sibling? What do you do in the moment?
It's a great question. So while we love actively ignoring should be a technique that we use for kids that are displaying minor misbehaviors, meaning the arguing, tantruming. When we're moving into disruptive or aggressive behaviors, hitting. Yes, it's attention seeking. Yes, we absolutely will be ignoring it, but we typically will pair that with a consequence. Younger children, it will often be a simple timeout, right? And a timeout is only a timeout from attention. So we're still doing that actively ignoring in that consequence. For older children, we tend to do a timeout or a loss of privilege, meaning they're either taking a short timeout, which we hope they do because it's short and easy, or we're going to take away, say, 30 minutes of screen time. Those systems, again, similar to behavior charts, they can be very complex in nature. We always want to be able to support families with timeouts. Timeouts take, at the very least, 60 minutes of a session to go through exactly how to implement a proper timeout. So that's something, if you're interested in getting just more support around, we can absolutely do that. Most of the time, we'll see the majority of those behaviors start to decrease with actively ignoring alone. And then anything left over, we can use a consequence for. But the most potent skills that you can do to change behavior will be the positive reinforcement, will be label praising, will be those skills. I like to think about it as like a hierarchy, a triangle like that, right? Consequences is very little at the very top, because consequences are actually a very mild punishment technique. They're really not that potent. They're not that helpful, to be quite honest. But positively reinforcing behaviors is incredibly important. And that's what will shape behaviors over time.
Okay.
Yeah, so feel free to reach out if you need any support on that, those types of behaviors.
So just to go a little deeper into aggression, if you have a child who is super activated, actively hitting, pushing, without trying to give more attention to that kid, is it advisable to, I mean, you need to stop the violence in the moment, right? So what's the best way to do that, I guess, without providing extra unwanted attention?
Great question. So you need to maintain safety no matter what. That's always our goal. Sometimes that means doing a reverse timeout, right? So sometimes it means like putting yourself in a room and moving yourself to a different room. As long as that child is safely in that room, that is always advisable if you feel like that can work. Again, usually it's going the next step to a consequence. If you do have another child present, or a dog, or a husband, or a wife, I love using differential attention, which is where, this is a fabulous skill that teachers use, and I tell them to use it all the time, which is where we are actually directing our attention to another person in the room. And sometimes I use this with babies, which is just hilarious, but we can reinforce a child or anybody else in the room for the positive opposite behavior that you're seeing, right? So if we're seeing hitting, the positive opposite of that behavior might be keeping a safe body. You look at that baby and you say, oh, I love the safe body that you have. And likely your child that is hitting might increase their behavior, right? It might spike a little bit, but eventually they might be looking for that attention too. So eventually you're going to see that start to fall, that behavior start to decrease until you see something that you can praise, right? And then you automatically turn to that child and you say, oh, great job putting your hands down. I love how safe your body is. You're so calm. I love when your body's so calm. I'm so excited to go have dessert now or do whatever, right? You're automatically shifting your behavior right back. And keep in mind, this is very fair because we're delivering the same amount of attention. It's just that we're being very strategic in where we're providing our attention and when.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about how to stop negative behaviors. How do you stop too much positive behavior? So I'm thinking of clinginess and, being the good kid so that because the kid is anxious and kind of trailing you around everywhere and doing all the chores and all that.
Yeah, so I think clinginess is a really good one. We want to shape that type of behavior. So as we're seeing maybe an increase in like separation anxiety and a child just like clingy, we want to shape that as much as we can, meaning we want to start with really small baby steps. So maybe it's, you're going to play by yourself for 5 minutes and I'm going to shut the door. And if you can play by yourself quietly on your own for 5 minutes while I'm in the other room, then we can play together for 5 minutes afterwards, right? So, and I do this in session, which is also funny because I'm just shutting the door and I get, but right, sometimes it's something as simple as that. So you're shaping that behavior. So you're moving up gradually, right? So 5 minutes playing by themselves, and now we're gonna work to 10 minutes. So that's often how we kind of target some of that like clingy behavior. If you're seeing a behavior occur at about a 75%, 80% consistency across the board, start to reinforce different behaviors, right? Start to verbally praise different behaviors. If you're working so hard on keeping a calm and safe body and you're seeing that calm and safe body most of the time, then let's switch to now praising for doing his homework really fast or, you know, coming to the dinner table quickly, right? So let's shift to a different behavior that we still might need support on.
Sounds great. Do you have any tips for parents on how to take their own anger out of the equation?
Yes, it's very hard. It's very hard. I think that it's first and foremost acknowledging that it's okay to get angry and it's okay to be human. And my goodness, they're so frustrating sometimes. I work with kids all day long, so I'm allowed to say that. No, but I think that I think that it is very difficult. I work with parents sometimes on this specific subject for a very long time because typically there's so much more there, right? And sometimes you need a therapist to help you kind of uncover what's really behind that. And sometimes we work with parents to do a little cognitive restructuring around, well, what is that bringing up for you, right? Like, how is that making you feel as a parent? What are your fears and your worries? The biggest thing, and this is ultimately the biggest thing and the biggest reason that we don't use physical punishment anymore, because we are modeling that behavior for our kids. If we spank our kid and they go to school and they hit a child, we just model that for them. And so it's a really, really difficult behavior because we just taught it to them. The same thing goes for anger and angry outbursts, right? Anger is a very appropriate and normal emotion, but we want to help our kids recognize when I'm feeling angry, what's an appropriate way to respond, right? And screaming, again, if you scream at your child, which it happens, we're only perfect 80% of the time too, right? When we are screaming and our kiddo screams back at us, again, it's just that cycle and that experience that we're kind of teaching and modeling. If you're reacting in a negative way to your child, it's going to hurt your relationship, right? So think about putting all that money in the bank and then that big emotional outburst is just kind of draining that bank. So we want to, as much as you can, recognize your cues that you're getting too frustrated, tap out. I think a tap out system, especially if you have another spouse or another caregiver, is huge. Tap in and out. Know when your buttons are being pushed too much that you're going to explode. Put yourself in a reverse timeout if you need to. It's okay. Ultimately, timeouts are for just kind of decompressing and coping and managing our anger and our explosion. So if you need that, there's nothing wrong with that. Our kids are, for the most part, most of us. So they know how to push our buttons more than anybody else does. Unfortunately.
Very skilled at it. All right, so our next question is about siblings. Siblings create their own coercive process in some ways, right? And parents want to know, how do we let them figure it out on their own? How much do we step in? What do we do?
So sibling conflict. So I think the skill that we just talked about, differential attention, is a good one that we can use with siblings very often. It typically works really well. At the same time, we want to, as much as possible, let siblings work things out on their own, right? Working through and problem solving is a really incredible skill that we want to help teach our kids. Striking when the iron's cold can help with sibling conflict, meaning we're letting the kiddos work it out as much as we can, right, while it's still safe. And then maybe we're checking in afterwards and working through what happens. Maybe we're checking in with them and listing out all of the possible solutions that could have occurred, right? Yes, you could punch your brother in the face. What do you think? You think that that's going to make your problem bigger or smaller? Right? You think that's going to help the problem, help the situation?
Or problem, but it'll feel good.
Exactly. Yes, it will. It might feel good. What are some other things that we can hit, right? What are some other things we can do instead, right? Going through all of the different solutions can also be really nice and powerful for our kids. We don't want to do that in the midst of the problem, right? If we're talking to a child when they're having a tantrum, when we're talking to a child when they're fighting with each other, guess what? Just like you guys, it's going to go in one ear and out the other. Nobody's listening. So let's talk to them when they're calmed down. Let's talk to them when they're relaxed, when everybody's emotions are pulled out of it a little bit. So sibling conflicts, as much as you can let kids work it out on their own, differential reinforcement can be a powerful tool here, right? Oh, Johnny, you're doing such a good job sharing so nicely. I love that, right? Just kind of like stepping in when you can. Oh, Kelly, great job sharing. I love that you're also doing that. Right? So kind of like delivering your attention where you can. We want to do that in a preemptive way, just like the coercive cycle. If we do it after the fact, it's reinforcing the negative behaviors. Say you're doing some work, because everybody's working from home. If you're doing some work, right, you're checking in on the kids, giving them a praise. If you hear a conflict, hold back, wait, see if they can solve it on their own. If they solve it on their own, awesome. I love that you guys just worked through that on your own, right? Great job kind of doing that together. Also, something that just to note, kids are used to being separated from their siblings. They're not anymore. Give them that separation. If that means after dinner, everybody's going to their room and they're relaxing for a little bit, set that time up because they need that time to recharge, just like you do, right? Just like you want to get away from your kids for a little bit as well.
All right, just one more question. Some parents really appreciate the personality characteristics that lead a child to be strong-willed and a good self-advocate and creative and a good negotiator, but of course don't want that applied to them in the moment. So so I hear this a lot from parents. How do I help discipline them without removing the strong will that they appreciate about their kids?
Absolutely. So I love this question because I always joke that our kids, especially the kids I work with, they're going to be the most amazing lawyers one day. And it's an incredible skill, especially for our daughters. We want to reinforce that up the wazoo, right? That's an incredible skill for them to advocate for themselves and to, have these creative ideas. We want to do it in a healthy way. So again, where you can, because you're in control ultimately, but where you can, give them control, give them autonomy. If that's picking out what they want for dinner, right? Give them a little bit of independence in ways that feel appropriate for them. Also, again, if they have a problem, help them bring it to you in an appropriate way. Help them advocate for themselves in an appropriate way, not in the moment, after the fact, right? You can help them recognize, because we're all human, right? We're all figuring this out too. You can help them recognize, this is the reason that I told you we can't play ball inside the house. It's really unsafe, right? All of these things. But let's come up with a different solution. Why don't you tell me your points, again, after the fact, right? After the initial blow up in the tantrum. Why don't you tell me all the reasons you want to? And let's kind of like talk about it together. Maybe we can come up with a solution that works for both of us. Again, depending on the age and if they're able to have that talk. And also, if your child is asking things in an appropriate way, reinforce that, right? If they're asking for something or they're searching for something or advocating for themselves in an appropriate and pro-social way, you want to absolutely praise that. And if they're not, there might be moments, and again, this is where it's helpful to work with somebody that can kind of pinpoint those moments for you, but there might be moments where we want to help shape that request into a more appropriate and adaptive way of asking for something, right? Like, well, actually, buddy, if you said it to me in this way, I might be able to listen to you.
Love it. That's awesome. Jill, thank you so much. This was really so informative. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Thanks again to Park Slope Parents for co-hosting us. We are going to be making the PowerPoint and the recording available to other people. Certainly, if you don't get a link, make sure that you email us and we'll make sure to get it. And of course, if you would like any additional support from the therapist or neuropsychologist at Small Brooklyn Psychology, Visit our website at smallbrooklyn.com or email us at hello@smallbrooklyn.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a really great evening.